take you, I thought very quickly to take you to the economic position of Fiji, where we are at the moment. I think one of the unfortunate things in Fiji has been that generally the media, the politicians, the entire political discourse in Fiji, in particular since independence, even prior to that, has not focused as much on the economy as it should. Been focused on many other issues, or communal issues, that does not do anything good for the economic well-being of the country. And I think developing countries like Fiji, and you as leaders, need to understand that the economy actually should be the centerpiece. So even in terms of the constitutional development in Fiji, with the 2013 constitution, many of what we may call the pending political constitutional issues, in fact, have been addressed. So because there is certainty in those particular areas as far as the constitution is concerned, our focus therefore needs to be on the economy. Because essentially, we need to ensure that the economic growth that Fiji has needs to improve the quality of life of all ordinary Fijians. And that's where we should be at. And to actually derive the economic potential, not just for now, but for the future. The economy has been growing actually for the past 80 years, as you can see, consecutively. It's never happened in Fiji before. The economy actually has grown previously for 7 years in a row consecutively, twice. Once post-independence, one in the 1990s. It's never happened for 80 years, projected to grow for at least another 3 years. So this will again be unprecedented. You can see generally things like cyclones, etc., always drive the economy down into negative growth. But even notwithstanding the Winston itself, our economy continued to grow because of the fact that the economy is positioned in a much better place. We recently had the statistics that has been revealed, which shows that the unemployment rate has now been the lowest it's ever been in the past 15 years, at 5.5%. However, the youth unemployment obviously is higher than 5.5%. Some people speculate to be 18%, but we contend it is not 18%, but it's most definitely higher than 5.5%. But the overall unemployment rate in Fiji is 5.5%, which is actually very, very good. We of course need to ensure that that growth, that unemployment rate continues to decrease even further. I'm taking very quickly through this. What are the areas that actually contribute to the economic growth? You can see, for example, agriculture is about 0.34. We believe there's a lot more potential here. These two sectors are very low, which means we may not be doing something right. It can also mean that there's a lot of economic potential there, a lot of potential there for us to be able to exploit. Manufacturing, again, Fiji is positioning itself as a hub. We manufacture a lot more over here in Fiji now than we ever did before, more than we did before, I should say. Construction, you can see there's construction boom everywhere. At the moment, there's construction taking place everywhere, not just in Suva, but around Viti Levu and also in Vanua Levu. In fact, so much so that we have contracting companies bringing in workers from Bangladesh and Philippines and Indonesia because they cannot meet the local demand, the appetite to have tradespeople. We don't have many professional tradespeople, trade skills people. You can lay a tile over here, but to lay a tile, for example, in the airport, at a hotel, is very different. So there's a lot of potential there. Of course, we've set up 13 technical colleges to meet these demands. But again, you can see a lot of growth in that area. I mean, people, for example, at the moment, our welder in Suva gets paid about $16, $17 an hour. Bricklayers are being paid $7, $8, $9 an hour. I had a construction company owner come to me and said, can you change the law because you're having a lot of problems? I said, what is your problem? He said, I have people working on the job site, and he said, after 5 days they moved away to another job site. I said, what happened? He said, well, I was paying them $8 an hour, whatever it was. The other guys offered them another $1 an hour extra, so they moved there. So that's how, fluid or supple the construction industry is at the moment because of the demand. The services sector obviously is very important for us. As you can see, financial services sector contributes about 0.45. But we believe there's a lot more potential here, in particular in the ITC sector. We're doing a lot of work behind the scenes at the moment. In fact, we'll be holding a forum very soon, getting all the key stakeholders together. Interestingly enough, there's a company called Mindpearl that exists in Fiji, and Mindpearl, when they came to Fiji, I asked them, I said, why have you come to Fiji? It's a very large South African-based company. They said, we've come here because you're in the right time zone. you're exactly 12 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. You all speak English. You have a young population, 69.4% of our entire population is below the age of 14. And something they told me which I was not aware of, apparently we have neutral accents. So when these companies go into India, and they mainly go into India and Philippines for these call centers and the back-end processing, they spend literally millions of dollars trying to get an Indian or a Filipino to change their accent so that an American or a Brit or Australian can understand them when they actually answer the call. Our accents are pretty neutral, so they understand us a lot better. We actually, for 3 years, paid them a rebate on every single dollar of salary they paid to Fijian workers, just to keep them here. They obviously now are here, and we no longer pay them any rebate. For a government, our government obviously, and obviously it makes good economic sense, we need to be able to have what we call broad-based growth. You simply cannot be dependent on one or two sectors for your economic growth. So Winston, which was originally projected to come down from Vanvalevu, come through Suva, hit Nasinu, all of these areas, go through the middle of Vitilevu, then hit Nandi and take out the tourism resorts, we would have been a completely different economic space if it had done that. Can you imagine the extent of damage? Would have damaged more hotel properties and tourism properties than what it did. We were very lucky actually. Winston, whilst it caused a lot of damage, cost us nearly $1.3 billion worth of damage. The fact is it did not affect the majority of the tourism properties. That's why we're able to bounce back quickly. That's why we're able to get the foreign reserves flowing very quickly, in particular after such a major catastrophe. So for us, the policy is to ensure that you have broad-based growth. You have many different sectors. So if one gets hit, you can rely on the others. Similarly, like in the tourism sector, we still think there's a particular level of risk because we are not able to spread our risk. For too long, the old policies have been focusing on getting tourists from only Australia and New Zealand predominantly. The moment 51% of all our tourism arrivals comes from Australia, 60 to 70% comes from New Zealand. If those two countries actually don't do economically well, guess what will be the impact on our tourism sector? People actually will need to go home. There will be less rooms occupied. So we have 61, 16, about 15 from North America. Only 3 sources. So that's why we want more Indians, we want more Chinese, we want more Europeans, we want other sources to come to Fiji tourists. So if we're able to say, hypothetically spread it, 20% over 5 countries, if one country stops coming, you can still depend on the other 80%. That's what they call mitigating the risks. And for as a government, that's what we've been focusing on. This is why we've had this growth. This is why there's so much confidence actually in the economy from that perspective. Inflation, there are 2 types of factors that actually have a huge impact on our inflation that are completely out of our control. One of them, of course, is the price of world fuel price. Completely out of our control. We don't determine the price of fuel. And the other one, of course, is a natural calamity, natural disaster. You can see price of fuel was about $149 a barrel around about then. You can see how the inflation actually went up because nearly everything we use actually we need fuel. Whether it's generating electricity in Vanvalevu and other parts in Fiji, and in Vitilevu, so I should say, whether it's running your buses, running your cars, whatever the case may be, there's an impact. We spend nearly about $1 billion worth of money buying fossil fuel from Singapore generally. But of course, world price of fuel came down, so you can see inflation kind of hovered around 2%. And of course, wonderful Winston came along. Killed 44 people. A small bunch of bananas in Suva, some of you may recall, cost like $20. Long beans cost $5. Yamona costs $120 a kilo. It still is about $120 a kilo, but some people still drink at the same rate. The fact of the matter is the price has not come down, but other areas it has come down, so you can see inflation has actually come down. It's hovering to around about 2%. But if you look at the overall statistics that the RGF has revealed, there's a number of areas where actual prices have again further come down. Some have slightly gone up. For example, alcohol, tobacco has gone up, but some of the other areas, in particular some of the food items, the prices have actually come down even further. Foreign reserves. A lot of people don't understand foreign reserves. Most of the things that we have, if I can just choose somebody, even I choose. So nearly everything he has on him is actually comes from overseas. The watch he's wearing is actually made in overseas. We have to bring it in. The shirt he's wearing may be sewn in Fiji, but the fabric comes from overseas. If they did do the design here, the die comes from overseas. The screen that is made actually is made overseas. This mic I'm holding comes from overseas. Nearly everything we have comes from overseas. But they don't sell it to us in Fijian dollars. They sell it to us in Japanese yen, US dollars, Aussie dollars, Kiwi dollars. So we need enough foreign reserves to be able to trade. Generally, colloquially speaking, internationally speaking, when a country does not have enough foreign reserves and they cannot trade, they say, oh, that country is going bankrupt because they cannot actually trade in terms of their ability to buy. International benchmark says you should have at least, this is the number of months, you should have at least 4 months worth of foreign reserves to be able to do trading. This is the international benchmark here. So you can see where we are. In nominal terms, we had only $549 million worth of foreign reserves in 2005, which gave us about 2.3 months of trading. Today, we sit at $2.4 billion of foreign reserves, which gives us about 5.9 months worth of trading to do. Now, one thing interesting which you need to understand very quickly is, you see over here in 2015 we were $1.9 billion worth. It gave us 5.9 months of trading. Over here with 2.4 billion, it gives us 5.9 also. So, despite the difference, the nominal figure is about $500 million more. We're still saying it's 5.9. Why? Because economic activity has increased. The demand for goods and services has increased significantly. You'd be surprised. There are a lot more Fijians now, of course, connected to electricity. So I was in the West, for example, and a lot of the places like department stores were saying to me, without me mentioning their names, you'd be surprised how many people are actually buying fridges, buying washing machines, buying microwaves, buying stoves, etc. Because they've just been connected to electricity. So that obviously then puts a lot more pressure to buy more foreign goods. So even though the reserves are higher, we still have more demand for it. It's of course a good space to be in. As you know that companies like Fiji Airways, when they bought A330s, they borrowed a little bit of money from FSDA, but the bulk of the funding came from European banks. So when European banks actually look at them and they actually negotiate the interest rates, one of the things they look at is this. If your foreign reserves, the high levels of foreign reserves, you're able to negotiate a better interest rate, much better ability to do so. Fiscal deficit, right from the Ratumara government, Ramuka government, the Labour government, Garase government, everybody in Fiji has run a deficit. We only had a surplus about 3 times. Most governments in the world actually run a deficit because the nature of government is such. The issue is how do you control your deficit? And probably the first most important point is, deficit means essentially you are spending more than what you are collecting. So, if you are spending more than what you are collecting, then what is your source of your additional revenue, which is loans. So the question you should ask, where are the loans going to? If you are borrowing money to pay for operational costs, not a good thing to do at all. If you are borrowing money to build assets, which will give you a return on that investment, that's obviously a good space to be in. There's obviously a quirky position here where we have this probably underspending. There's nothing to write home about. But over here, essentially, you can see these lines are very, very long. That's dangerous when you get such long lines. The longer the line, of course, the bigger the deficit. You can see what we've done in the past since 2007. Our average fiscal deficit has been 2.4%, which is quite good. Over here, TC Winston, of course, actually led us to borrow at least $220 million more, unexpected borrowing. Schools itself cost $170 million to rebuild. 95% of all the schools we were rebuilding did not even have an architectural plan or engineer's plan. You have to rebuild better, it costs a lot more money to be able to do that. So that's the deficit without me. I've been told I've got 10 minutes, probably now 7 minutes. Government revenue, just to very quickly show you that. Total government revenue collected in 2004 was $1.1 billion. Today we collect about $3.8 billion. We tripled government revenue. Now this is why we talk about compliance. There are a lot of people who still should be paying taxes, they are not paying taxes. We've obviously smartened up the way that we collect revenue. So the more revenue we collect, the better it is. Of course, there are many areas we actually collect far less revenue than we should be. If you today go and get an extract of your birth certificate of yourself or your child, it costs $2.25. It costs more to print that certificate than the actual cost of the money you're giving us. So why we've done it? Because that's a basic necessity. If you go to a hospital today, you don't pay for your medical bills, essentially. unless you go to paying ward, and it's like $43 for 5 days. Try going to do that to a private hospital. My point is that there are certain services, obviously, that we have to ensure that what we may call from a typical commercial perspective, we're running at a loss. But you have to do that because you're government. But there are other areas, of course, we need to be able to collect the right amount of taxes. What are the sources of revenue? So direct taxes, this is your PAYE, your corporate tax, value-added tax, VAT, customs, 19.3, a lot of leakage here, a lot of corruption here. The Fiji Revenue and Customs Services that recently got a pay rise. The people who got more than 50% or 50% pay rise were the customs officers. So obviously it's for a particular reason. But we still think there's a lot of leakage here. And these are the other areas that actually contribute to growth. ECAL, of course, the Environmental Climate Adaptation Levy. As you know, that we passed a law where it's now mandatory upon us to publish every single cent that's collected from ECAL. And by law now, we can only direct funds collected from ECAL only to environmental and climate adaptation programs. So these will all be published from next year at airports, etc. Bulk of the people who pay ECAL, of course, are tourists. Very quickly, I mean, they speak for themselves. Infrastructure development, health, education, access, justice, social protection, what we call social sectors. We've lumped them together to show you how much money we spend now as opposed to what was being spent before, 1.3 billion, $4.3 billion a year. A lot of social welfare and social protection measures have been put in place. Rural pregnant women get food vouchers, pensioners, 5 minutes, pensioners. There are a lot of people who'll be surprised who don't have FNPF. A lot of women in Fiji don't have FNPF because they've never worked for anybody, they've stayed at home. A lot of villagers, a lot of farmers, they've never had FNPF. So when they get old, they don't have a pension. All of you will have a pension at the age of 55. You can withdraw your pension completely or you can get paid until you die. These people don't have anything. So you know that society is changing. The tradition has been that when you actually get older, your kids will look after you. When they get older, their kids will look after them. That does not necessarily happen everywhere. There are a lot of elderly people who now we give them $100 a month, husband and wife both, and both of them are alive. As a form of social protection for them. There are many other things, disabled persons. Of course, we have access to justice, legal aid. Legal aid is now everywhere, including places like Kandabu, Ovalau, Nambuwalu, Tabuni, Rosuma, etc. Education, of course, now free. Health has a major issue, which is the issue of getting specialists into Fiji. It's a big problem because there has been an enormous lack of investment in human capital in the health sector in Fiji, generally speaking, over all the civil service areas, but also specifically in health. You can't get somebody who's just got an MBBS, expect them to cut you open and play around with your heart. You need to send them for 10, 15 years for training to become a cardiac surgeon. That has not happened. We've now had a Dr. Biribo, who's just come back from New Zealand. He's the only now neurosurgeon in Fiji. We've invested in him. You should go and see the state of the art theaters that we have. It's fantastic. But we don't have necessarily the people. It's not very easy to get specialists too. If you want to send a specialist to Lambasa, you go to Mumbai or somewhere else and say, we're going to send you to Lambasa, they'll ask you things like, what's the nightlife like? Is there international school? These are the kind of things people don't understand. That you need to be able, in order to attract people, you need to be able to have the right facilities available for them to come. Of course, you can go and get facts, and they'll do a dodgy job, but in order for you to get the right people, these are the kind of some of the challenges we have. This is very important. As you know that when you have your own budget, there are two types of expenditures that you have. One is your general operating expenditure, the other is obviously your capital expenditure. So 83% of all the money spent in 2004 went into operating. You got nothing to show for it the following year. That's your cost of your salary, your toilet paper, your photocopying paper, the running of the fuel, travel, etc. But only assets, roads, bridges, schools, medical centers was only 17%. Look at this spend now. 59 actually goes into operating, but 41 goes into capital. So some people have said, if you're borrowing now, the future generations will have to pay for it. Ratamara's government incurred debts. The Rabuka government, when they came in, they incurred debts too, but Rabuka government had to pay the Ratamara government debts. When the Labour government came in, they incurred their own debts, but they have to pay the debt of the Rabuka government and the Ratamara government. When the Garasa government came in, they incurred their own debts, and then pay the debts of everybody else. When we came in, we incur our own debts, we pay the debts of everybody else. So, and I'll show you the debt position very quickly. So, but the point is that if you're building a 4-lane road in Nandi now, I don't know how many have seen it, the future generations don't have to do that. So we're actually saving them from building it. That road will last us for the next 20, 25 years, perhaps even longer. We build things like resilience into infrastructure. If you go there next time, please look at one thing. There's no overhead cables. All the overhead cables have actually been put underground. Pipes have been removed as much as possible and put on the side of the road. So next time there's a water leakage, you don't dig up the road to fix up the pipe. Traditionally, roads have been built like that in Fiji. They put water pipes directly underneath the roads. In Suva, there's a major problem in Suva. Most of the areas in Suva that have potholes, water pipes underneath there. No point is fixing up the road because the leakage may be there. Some of these pipes are old. They're 50 years old, 60 years old. Some of them actually were built using asbestos. So you need to be able to dig all those things out. It's a huge capital investment into those areas. So we're building resilience by doing those sorts of things, but the future generations don't have to do that. Tahsil the road from Numbawal to Duketi. Now you have Tahsil road all the way from Numbawal to Lambasa. The future generations don't have to do that. But the productive capacity of that area has significantly increased. Funding for roads and bridges, I mean, this is just comparison. I mean, I don't have to, they speak for themselves. Good old PWD, there is 528 million. Water, energy, electricity, we give also subsidized electricity now. Cost, unit cost of that is 34 cents. We now pay 50% of the tariff cost on the consumer's behalf of FEA. We don't tell FEA, you charge them half the cost. FEA charges the full cost, we pay FEA. Because that's how you run a state-owned enterprise that will give a state-owned enterprise a strong balance sheet. They should not be doing social responsibilities without the government actually paying them directly. We need the state-owned enterprise to stand alone on their own 2 feet. Funding for education speaks for itself. I don't have to go through that. Again, free education, health and all that, and improved funding for health. Again, quite significant. Doctors, as you know, about 18 months ago received a pay rise about 80%, some of them. Operating savings, this is what I said. This is how much money we make. Operating revenue from there to there. Operating expenditure, paying for all the day-to-day costs, we get that much savings, $896 million. That means we have to borrow less to be able to do the capital expenditure. Debt, a lot of people talk about debt, including in media, they don't understand debt, a lot of them. You have, for example, this is what we call the nominal figures. $2.2 billion debt over here, today we're debt of $5.2 billion. What really matters is this, as a percentage of your GDP. So, when the value, the simple example I've used with the school kids when I go to the high schools, I explain to them, if for example our GDP, gross domestic product, or essentially the value of your goods and services in that country, you say $100, then we go out and borrow say $20. Then we would say our debt to GDP ratio is 20%. And so nominal sum is $20, as a percentage 20%. But assuming our wealth increases, grow richer, and Fiji has grown richer because our GDP actually has increased. And assuming our GDP becomes $500, we say, oh, we're going to borrow actually $50 now. 2.5 times more than what we originally borrowed in nominal terms, figure terms. Even though you're now borrowing 2.5 times more than what you originally borrowed, as a percentage of GDP, it's only 10%. 50 or 500 is 10%. So as you get bigger, your ability to borrow increases. In the same way, if you're earning $30,000 a year, you're not going to go to the bank, it's not necessarily going to give you a loan for $1 million because you don't have the capacity to repay. But if you're actually going to have, say, have $500,000 of annual revenue or income, then you can borrow actually $1 million. So the point over here is, very quickly, you can see, I'll take a look at your eating my question time. You see, $2.8 billion in 2006, this is nominal, as a percent of GDP is 53.3%. Right? Over here, even though it's $5.2 billion, as a percent of GDP is only 47.5. See what I mean? So even though the debt in nominal terms is higher here, as a percent of GDP is lower than when your debt was lower, but it was higher in percent of GDP. Why? Because our GDP has grown. This country to become wealthier. Its ability to borrow actually increases. Out of this, as a matter of interest, 5.2 billion, about $2.2 billion worth of debt we inherited from the previous governments. You can see from here what we would have inherited. We've obviously been paying it, we've been doing some smarter things. We look at high interest loans, we try and pay that off earlier by borrowing it from different sources. By comparison, look at this. Japan, percent of GDP debt is 239.2%. Ours is 47 point, whatever it is, 45.8. Theirs is 239.2%. Nominal debt, $11.8 trillion. USA, Singapore, 112% of GDP. 332.7 billion. USA, 90 trillion. 9.9 trillion, 107.4%. Canada, the other day somebody said to me in Parliament, Canada is the way to go. Today, have you seen the debt? Because all these people talk about debt without understanding it. And I really feel very strongly about this because the discourse in Fiji regarding debt is actually quite pathetic. I think they've been blown out of proportion. I know Nasik is here. Fiji Times has been at the forefront of doing atrocious discourse, and the polemics around it is quite pathetic. They don't understand that. They need to understand that. And they don't contextualize it. Let's compare ourselves to, I'm not saying he personally is doing that, but I don't know, Nasik. But let's compare ourselves to, comparable countries. Maldives, Seychelles, Nauru, Mauritius, Tuvalu, these are island states. And look at their levels of debt as a percentage of GDP. Mauritius, I was there earlier this year, very interesting country, very similar to Fiji, smaller than us, but they're predominantly sugar-driven and tourism-driven, more sort of European influence than us. They decided a few years ago, they've essentially done what we are doing, but on a much bigger scale. They did it much sooner than us. They said, look, we cannot simply just depend on, say, sugar and tourism itself. What they did was they built 4-lane roads everywhere, everybody got connected to internet, they built IT parks. So what they did was they positioned themselves. They're very close to Africa. They're only about 3.5 hours away from Africa. As you know, the perception about Africa is not necessarily very positive. There's a lot of civil wars going on, etc. But economically, it's the next boom continent. It's got the largest percentage of arable land that is underutilized. It's got one of the largest percentages of youth. So it means when you have young people, it means there's a huge demand for goods and services. So what Mauritius did, they went out to the rest of the world and said, come and be based in Mauritius to service Africa. And sure enough, they did. See, all the large international firms are based in Mauritius. They've given them free accommodation as far as IT parks are concerned, etc. They went to India. They got 2 or 3 internationally certified Indian hospitals to come in. So they went out to Africa and said, when you have to the rich Africans, don't go to Europe, don't go to India for heart surgery, come to Mauritius. Get your surgery done, and by the way, spend 2 weeks in our resort and then go back. It's working. It's doing well. They're very strict. They don't like what we've done recently with this Ladet. They don't allow any foreigners to own any property in terms of real estate. They can only buy apartments. Precisely what we have done. Obviously, they're a lot more stricter than us. We've allowed foreigners to own land outside municipal areas. They don't allow them anywhere. And when a foreigner, for example, buys a strata title apartment, 50% of that goes as tax to the government. So they've done those things very cleverly, but as a result, they've incurred a lot of debt. 7.5 billion, this is US dollars. Percent of GDP, 62.7. But it's good debt, because it increases their productive capacity. And that's very, very important. This comparison. I won't go into major revenue areas for the 2017-2018 budget. But the simple example that I give from this is that the moment you have a villager or somebody's a fisherman, they go and catch fish. When they don't have electricity, when they're selling the fish by the side of the road, you drive past, you don't buy it. By the end of the afternoon, they bring down the price of the fish, because they know that they cannot keep the fish. They either have to sell it at a cheaper price, or if they don't sell it, they have to eat it themselves or give it away, or the fish rots. The moment you connect them to electricity, they won't bring down the price. Even in the afternoon, they won't bring down the price, because they know they can keep it in the refrigerator or the cooler, whatever it is. So they keep it in the cooler. Next day you drive past, they put the same fish out, throw water on it, say fresh fish for sale. The income level is not. When they go out and fish, they can catch other things because they can store it. So that's a short presentation, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm of course open for any questions. Thank you.